Left to the right, top to the floor. When I say Black history, say it's yours. Black history, it's yours. Black history, yes, it's yours.
And we say it loud and proud again. There's no America without the African. Fighting to get it equal. Black history, the story of the people. Black history, it's yours. Black history, yes, it's yours. It's yours. Only 28 days in the month of February. It's just a kickoff, we don't stop till every textbook and every class give up the glory. The true and living facts of his and her story. People want to know why we still celebrate it. Road been rocky and we made it, we elated. Our survivors, strivers, fighters, singers get us dropping names like we have butterfingers. Rosa, King, X-Truth, the greatness. Ali, Fred Douglass, these are the basics. But how about Bessie Coleman, the fly aviatrix? Or Katherine Johnson, who helped launch the spaceships? Or Lewis Latimer illuminating homes? Or Dr. Shirley Jackson improving telephones? Or Fred McKinley Jones keeping ice cream cold? I could go on and on till my body get old. Left to the right, top to the floor. When I say Black history, say it's yours. Black history, it's yours. Black history, yes, it's yours.
Welcome to the Jacksonville Field Office Black History Month celebration for the year 2024. Lunch menu today will be fried chicken, mac and cheese, collard greens, cornbread, and Coke. And you wonder how these foods relate to Black history. Well, let us just step into history and find out.
Historical origins of fried chicken. The origin of fried chicken goes all the way back to ancient Rome. The first known mention of a fried chicken recipe was found in a Roman cookbook known as the Abacus. However, it was the Moors in the Mediterranean who played a significant role in further developing and perfecting the art of frying chicken. Traditional fried chicken as we know it today comes from a mix of Scottish and West African cultures. The Scots were the first to introduce the idea of frying chicken, which was quite different from the usual European cooking methods of baking and broiling. Historical records suggest that the Scots had been deep frying chicken in fat as far back as the Middle Ages. An interesting piece of evidence from 1773 was the diary of a writer, James Boswell, who wrote about a dinner he had in the Isle of Skye that included fried chicken. One of the earliest known written recipes for fried chicken comes from a British cookbook titled The Art of Cookery, Plain and Easy by Hannah Glasse in 1747. The recipe was loved by both British and the American colonies. African influence on fried chicken. Although it was Scottish immigrants who first introduced fried chicken to the United States, they were not the ones that popularized it. That was done by Western Africans. During that time, Western Africans were very familiar with cooking chicken, and they used the braising technique back home. However, once in America, enslaved Africans used their culinary traditions to introduce the concepts of seasoning and spices that infused flavor and zest into an otherwise ordinary dish. See, at the time, the Scots weren't putting any seasoning in their fried chicken. Enslaved people found themselves in an alien landscape amidst unfamiliar food and culinary norms. They had to learn how to utilize the ingredients that were available to them while continuing to draw on their deep culinary traditions. African culinary habits vastly featured poultry and chicken, so chicken played a significant role because it became an easily adaptable food when they reached a new world. The culinary skill and ingenious improvisation of the enslaved people played a huge role in the growth and popularity of fried chicken. They merged their African cooking techniques with the ingredients accessible to them in America and created a unique dish. In the period following the Civil War, mass-produced fried chicken and other species of oils became readily available. However, during the same time, racial laws restricted employment opportunities for African Americans, particularly women. So, they resorted to selling their homemade fried chicken, often considered a Sunday meal to travelers. This economic strategy helped propagate Southern railways and solidified chicken as a Southern staple and a nationwide symbol. The best example of this took place in Gordonville, Virginia. Despite the small town of only 900 residents, Gordonville, Virginia was an important stop for two major railroad lines. During that time, trains did not have dining cars, so passengers had to figure out how to feed themselves. Some would pack their own food, while others chose to purchase meals during their trip. Spotting a business opportunity, African American women started selling their homemade food to passing travelers. They would serve fried chicken in pies and biscuits and deliver them to the hands of passengers on a platform through the train windows. The women were known as waiter carriers. By the turn of the century, most of the trains began to move with dining cars, and government regulations became more stringent for platform food vendors. And as a result, this innovative business tradition had to come to an end.
Macaroni is a dried, molded pasta traditionally made from wheat flour and water. Its origins back to ancient Greece. The term macaroni comes from the Greek word for maker, meaning blessed. The pasta became an integral part of the Mediterranean diet and subsequently permeated its way through Greek, Roman, and Arabic cultures. However, the inclusion of cheese into the equation did not come into the existence much later in Europe. First known recipes for a macaroni and pasta type dish was de lasagne, which required layering sheets of pasta with cheese and spices. It can be found in one of the oldest Middle-aged cookbooks called The Form of Curry, which was compiled by cooks of England's King Richard II in the 14th century. However, a more recognizable form of the dish originated in Italy, where certain types of pastas and cheese in a casserole were documented all the way back to the 13th century Italian cookbook called the Liber de Cucina. But macaroni and cheese, as we know it, was introduced to the Americas by Thomas Jefferson. But he didn't cook the dish himself. During his tenure as an envoy in France, Thomas Jefferson enjoyed a similar type pasta dish in France, and he commissioned his enslaved black cook by the name of James Hemings to learn how to make it. James Hemings was the older brother of Sally Hemings, who was also the half-brother of Jefferson's deceased wife. In 1784, when Hemings was just 19 years old, he traveled with Jefferson and his daughter to Paris. In Paris, James trained under different French chefs. Over the next 5 years, he became a master of French cooking and got particularly good at cooking macaroni pie. This was a creamy pasta dish that eventually turned into what we know as macaroni and cheese. The recipe involved using whatever cheese he had on hand, layering it in between buttered macaroni mixed with milk. He would then cook it in a Dutch oven, which he placed over a fireplace, and hot coals would be placed over the lid to bake the macaroni and cheese. Even though Hemings' crucial contribution to cooking, and he was famous as a chef, he remained relatively unknown. This was because he was still enslaved under Thomas Jefferson until 1796, and he was one of only 2 slaves that Jefferson set free, and that was only under the condition that James would teach his younger brother, Peter, to take over in his place as Jefferson's cook of the household. Peter Hemings would then serve the dish at a state dinner in 1802, making it famous. Unfortunately, collard greens were made popular in Europe by the Greeks and the Romans. Ancient Greeks grew kale and collard greens together and made little distinction between the two. Historians are unsure on whether or not Romans discovered greens through the Greeks or if they started growing them independently. When the Romans went on their conquest of what is now the United Kingdom, they introduced collard greens to European diets around the 4th century BC. Their introduction to Africa, however, comes long before transatlantic slave trade and became a dominant part of African people's diets, even to this day. Many countries in Africa, especially those in Eastern Africa, love the green leafy vegetable, which is known as sukuma wiki. Collard greens were loved in the southern part of the United States because other plants struggled to grow during cold winter months. In fact, collard greens were so resilient that they could survive through all seasons, but they generally thrive from around January to April. When enslaved Africans were brought here to the United States, they didn't leave their culinary traditions behind. They brought along their traditions and the practices of cooking collard greens. While their oppressors may have consumed select foods, enslaved people were left with the leftovers, which included the harder stems of the collard greens. Despite these tough circumstances, the enslaved Africans showcased their creativity by transforming simple collard greens into flavorful meals. The classic recipe included simmering collard greens slowly in a pot of water until they became tender with either salt pork, ham hocks, or turkey necks to balance out the tough texture and the bitter taste of the greens. Food historian Michael Twitty would state that many culinary historians agree that the green craze in the South is supported by the spring greens among Celtic and Germanic Southerners, but it was really spearheaded by people of African descent. The greens were then served with homemade cornbread, and the practice involved dipping the bread into the broth that remained in the pot, fondly known as the pot liquor. The liquor is the leftover soup at the bottom of the pot that was created from the extended cooking process of leafy greens or beans. After the greens have been cooked thoroughly, the nutrients would often seep to the bottom of the pot. This is basically the liquor that is left in the bottom of the pot. According to Southern wisdom, the pot liquor will cure what ails you, and if nothing ails you, it will at least clean you out.
We got all these things made with cornmeal in the South, and we have to thank our indigenous communities for bringing this ingredient to our Southern foodways. Native Americans first began domesticating wild grasses more than 8,000 years ago. These varieties became the earliest form of maize. By the early colonial period, corn was the staple of life on Southern tables, an essential companion to every meal.
History of food within the African American community, you really start to see just how much they did themselves in order to build their community and sort of rebuild that culture that they lost. Cornbread is a really interesting thing. Now in America, the most widely available staple is corn. So almost every single dish they would have had to eat had to be with corn. And it's really interesting when you look into the sort of excerpts of slave diaries, and they would mention how Native Americans taught them how to use things like corn flour in order to make different things, such as cornbread. And so one of the earliest forms of cornbread would be a very simple dough made from corn flour, wrapped in collard greens and baked in ashes so that it would be fully cooked. So
corn muffins in the shape of muffins. You could just get cornbread. You know why it was corn muffins? So you could stuff them in your pack when you had to cross over that railroad. You know what you can eat on the move?
A little piece of bread.
Yeah, and you know what you can use to bait the dogs?
Well, a little piece of bread.
Did you know that Coca-Cola was heavily influenced by racism and marketed primarily to whites, while Pepsi established a division dedicated to targeting African-American consumers? John Pemberton, an Atlanta pharmacist and the inventor of Coke. This product was actually his second drink, though. Prior to Coca-Cola, in 1884, Pemberton created a French wine cola. This drink was a copy of a popular French wine that contained cocaine. However, just as the product was gaining popularity, Atlanta made a decision to outlaw alcohol sales in November of 1885. This led to, in 1886, John Pemberton creating a temperance drink with reported medicinal effects. He named it Coca-Cola. This drink became popular, and it was seen as a socially acceptable alternative to drinking alcohol in bars. Coca-Cola quickly became embraced as an intellectual beverage of well-off whites. Eliminating alcohol was only a temporary solution, as Asada G. Chandler, who had taken over the business, kept the formula a secret. However, as an Atlanta newspaper would reveal in 1891, what consumers already knew, Coca-Cola contained cocaine. Chandler began marketing the drink as refreshing rather than medicinal and managed to survive the controversy. But concerns erupted again after the company began distributing distinctive glass bottles in 1899, making it easily accessible to people of all races. Middle-class whites worried that the soft drink was contributing to the rise of cocaine use among African Americans. Southern newspapers reported Negro coke fiends were raping white women, and the police were seemingly powerless to stop them. By 1903, Chandler responded to these white fears and a wave of anti-narcotics legislation by removing cocaine and adding sugar and caffeine. Coca-Cola's recipe was not the only thing influenced by racism. During the 1920s and 30s, Coca-Cola was heavily influenced by white supremacy, and this manifested itself in their lack of targeting of black consumers. Coca-Cola would go as far as introducing double-sided vending machines, one side for black Americans and another side for white Americans. Meanwhile, Pepsi was the second largest drink company in the country and attempting to compete with Coca-Cola by offering a sweeter product in a larger bottle for the same price. Despite their best efforts, they still trailed behind Coca-Cola into the 1940s. To gain a competitive edge, Pepsi CEO Walter S. Mack hired a team of African Americans to create a Negro Markets department aimed at marketing to African Americans. Into the late 1940s, Pepsi began a marketing campaign targeted at African American consumers in the Southern Black Belt and in northern urban areas. They hired Duke Ellington as a spokesperson, ran ads in black publications, and set up special point to purchase displays in stores frequented by African Americans. However, as a result, some Americans began to associate Pepsi with black people, and Pepsi quickly killed the program. However, this image of Coke and Pepsi as white and black drinks continued to persist. It was not long after this that Coke sought to shake their whites-only drink tag and began marketing to African Americans. They also began to support African American organizations and developed a relationship with the NAACP. It took some time, but the new tactic worked, and today, racial lines between soda companies, even in the South, is just a distant memory. Soft drink companies are now on good terms with one of their largest demographic markets, African Americans.
History, it's yours. Black history, yes, it's yours. Black history, yes, it's yours.
Gotta say it loud and proud again. There's no America without the African. Fighting to get it equal. Black history, the story of the people.
We gave you traffic lights to stop the crash, almanacs, gas furnace, and gas mask. Gave you hip-hop, Tila rock, blues and jazz, and fresh new dances with flair and pizzazz. Automatic gear shifts to move the cars. Potato chips and peanut butter in jars. Laundry dryers, home security systems, super soakers and suspenders. I could go on listing. Many contributions across institutions. Supreme Court and Ball Court, it's been an evolution. And we sing it every day. Blue notes like Harold Melvin for this Billie Holiday. We know what's going on. Thanks to Marvin Gaye. Get a bounce in our step on cue like Kid and Play. Gwendolyn and Kendrick, our poets represent. Hold mics tight like truths that's self-evident. Yeah, we know our heroes fantastic, but gotta remember the forgotten on the Atlantic. We gotta honor our departed, taken from the land where humanity started. Left to the right, top to the floor. When I say Black history, say it's yours.